Thank you. And this is Dr. Nina Schifrin over here. She's the Associate Director of our research that we do, but also primarily a clinician at the practice. Received her Ph.D. from Yale and did internship in Philadelphia. And Dr. Colleen Cummings, who also worked at the I'm blanking which school. I can remember at Temple University. Did a several-year postdoc there, and is a clinician, and she's the director of research. So our practice does primarily clinical work, but we also have a lot of training programs for professionals, and then we do research, outcome research on our programs. And we are also doing a randomized control study now that we have just finishing up, although we're going to continue, but the major data is coming in from 4 schools in DC and in Montgomery County to really look at the Resilience Builder program and the outcome. Anyway, I'm excited to be here, and I have been here many times before, and I was just remarking how this place, if you're familiar with it, has just changed over the years. It's, you know, that was sort of, you could see it from Whitehall, and now there are all these buildings, and it's just wonderful to see sort of the growth and an emphasis on strengths. And that's what really appealed to me about the whole study of resilience. So we're going to talk about what helps our kids, whether you're a parent or a teacher, but what helps them thrive. But I also want you to keep in mind that it's what helps adults thrive as well. So the protective factors have been looked at over many, many years, and it's something we all do for ourselves. So just disclosure, I have several books. The Resilience Builder program is a curriculum, primarily a group curriculum to help kids build resilience. And then CDs that are also available online. And then my new book is called Conquer Negative Thinking for Teens, and that's basically a workbook. So whenever I do a talk, I really start with making sure that we always are aware of the cultural context in which we work. I'm a first-generation American, grew up in New York, and I did not speak English at home. We spoke Russian and some Armenian and whatever other languages relatives would come that are living in different parts of the world. And I've always been interested in sort of the cultural aspects that affect our lives, and particularly mental health, and understanding, how in different languages and different cultures are emotions expressed. How are they expressed more on physiological level? How much stigma is associated with mental health? My dad, being from Russia, was like, no, you're not going to be a psychologist. You have to be a doctor or teacher or something practical. And so there are these inherent biases that we grow up with. And as a clinician, I try to look at all of the context. So with the resilience, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of where the research was, but it was from many different cultures. So it's not just based here. And also, if a family speaks a different language, what are the words and what happens when there are strong emotions? Because, many of you who speak other languages, or maybe English isn't your primary, then you might, when you have strong emotions, might then be able to much quicker, be able to express them in your language of origin. I know, in my house, if somebody came, my friends are like trying to find, follow the conversations, and it was like 4 languages in 1 sentence. And so it's whatever is easiest. So, and then racial identity and involvement with culture institutions is also really important. The APA conducted research with children, African American children, and noticed that the identity really matters, how you identify and what your support group. But I will say that also is critical for kids with LD, ADHD. It's being proud and, well, first okay, and then proud of the identity, meaning the multifaceted that we are. So, but we can't really support our children until we support ourselves. So I always say, make sure the oxygen mask is on you and that you do self-care before you take care of your child or children, or if you're a teacher, your students. And this is often overlooked, and some of the basics are sleeping, getting enough sleep and eating, and then of course getting your support system in place, just like in getting movement. I don't use the word exercise because that has negative connotations for me too. But if we move, right, that is part of something that keeps us healthy too. So again, what keeps us happy, motivated, and helps us overcome the challenges? I like this little quote, and it's, life is not always a matter of holding good cards, but sometimes it's playing the hand well, right? So it's not just what we're dealt with whatever we're dealt with, but how do we use it? How do we enhance it? How do we embrace it? How do we develop ourselves? Because we all have strengths and weaknesses, and we really want to encourage them and promote them, and this is the goal of playing the hand well. What we have found with some of the research in resilience is that most people are resilient, but it's not you're either resilient or you're not. You can be resilient and more resilient in certain areas, certain times in your life. So it's not just either or, but this Ann Maston, who's written a lot about it, talks about resilience as ordinary magic. So we want to embrace that magic, but it's not so extraordinary, which means it can be learned. That when we have deficits in resilience, we can bolster those areas and develop them. And it's moving away from the deficit model. I trained many years ago, and what was predominant there was a deficit model. What was wrong with people? What were they missing? And I found it really depressing, because they would say, and this one is this, and this one, I was like, you just kind of, it's a burden. It just makes you get down, as opposed to looking at the strengths model, and instead of looking at deficits, what are the assets? And what are the assets that we've identified that we can then build? So just to, how I explain resilience to kids, 2 ways. So we have this magic ball, and it bounces. So much that I lose it. Wow, it's bouncy. Okay. And we talk about, we talk about resilience as sort of when you have challenges and you have stress and bad things happen to you, or just things that you find frustrating and difficult and that promote anger. And our goal is to really build ourselves up, come up with coping strategies and ideas that we can do, and slowly build that so we can bounce again. It really does bounce. I also use a rubber band, and we talk about the stresses and the challenges, just everyday life challenges. A math problem might be difficult, reading might be difficult, a friend said something to you and you're not sure how to respond, and you grow and grow. But what we don't want to happen is we don't want to snap. We don't want it to be so much that we snap. Instead, we want to, again, come up with ways to calm ourselves down so that we can think more clearly, strategies to help us, problem solve with friends, ask for help from teachers or whatever, so that we are flexible. And we talk about flexibility as a key to being resilient. It's also a key, we know, to just being mentally healthy. That psychological flexibility is really just one of those key components. So when we talk about resilience, we also look at risk factors, and what are the risks? Maybe, in many cases, learning issues. In some cases, it might be some family difficulties or divorce or a sibling that has many different functioning difficulties. But what are those risks? And the goal is to build as many protective factors and resources into the life of the child so we can bolster. And again, remember, there's a brochure back there called Road to Resilience, and that's for adults. So all of these protective factors that I'm going to talk about are for the whole age span. So what factors would you think are important in resilience? Some guesses? What do you think would be important? Relationships, yes. Yes, and a sense of humor. Very good. Flexibility, yes. Yes. Growth mindset, meaning that you know that you can try and that someone is going to also pay attention to sort of the process of what goes on and not just the outcome. Any others? Yes.
A real internal sense of oneself.
An internal sense of oneself, yes. And somebody said optimism. I don't know who that was. Yes.
I was going to say external factors, what you've actually been through, what has seasoned and conditioned you.
So the external factors that perhaps you have, so some of the external factors may be risk factors, but those that you have coped well with or have overcome or figured out how to get around, yes, builds our resilience. Very good. Yes.
Openness to change.
Oh.
New opportunities.
Openness to change, to new opportunities, right. We can look at a challenge as oh my gosh, I can't face it, I can't do it, or we can look at it as, oh, all right, this is a challenge, I'm going to try to figure out how to do it. And so if we're open to change and know that we can change, which I think is we'll get to that, but so some of them, the skills, we changed it. Traditionally in the research, they only talked about resilience in terms of extreme adversities and traumas. And just because I've been a psychologist now for 40 years, and the kids that I work with are not necessarily have these tremendous adversities, but they have a daily adversity, which is school and homework and getting through the challenges of relationships and academics and just all of those things that prove challenging for them. So we expanded the definition to include not just hardships, but difficulties and challenges. So some of the protective factors are taking initiative, not feeling like you're a victim, knowing that while you can't control everything, you can control many aspects of your life and focus on those that you can control. So taking initiative, meaning you don't say, oh, I can't, and woe is me, all these bad things are happening to me. Rather saying, all right, what am I going to do about it? Faced with the challenge, how am I going to handle it? What am I going to do? I do have some control. And getting back to looking at opportunities, I see kids who all of a sudden say, I can change that. I'm like, yeah, you have the power to change it. Like, you can't control whether if your parents decide to move to another city and you have to go to another school. But you can control how you're going to handle that and ask for going to the school and visiting or finding out some other kids and getting together with them. I mean, there are things that you can't control the move, but you can certainly control some of the aspects of it. Attachments, relationships are critical. We know that as long as a child has one good friend, that helps buffer them from bullying or just feeling very alone. So, unlike a lot of the old research that says you need more friends, we now find you really just need one good buddy. I mean, it's nice to have a few. So if your one good buddy is absent, there's somebody else there for you. but you don't really need a host. So it's not a popularity thing where you need lots and lots of friends, but one who's going to stand by you and you truly have a reciprocal relationship. And the same with connections with adults. If you can relate and connect with at least an adult, and whether it's a parent, and some families just don't work that way, and so it might be a coach or somebody else, but you only need really like one main adult who's going to be there for you and really understand you. And it's usually a parent. And if you have two parents in a household, you know, one may understand the child a lot better. So it's that connection of really sort of getting it on a gut level of some of the challenges that they face. Proactive parenting means setting the bar high so that the behavioral expectations are high, but it's coupled with warmth and an understanding and really good listening. So not the tiger mom of unrealistic expectations. The bar is high but realistic, you know, but it's got to be with that warmth and caring combined. And community really encompasses schools. So where your child is in school is such a significant part of the day is really critical, because it can be, you know, just think about maybe doing a project that you really hate or is really hard. I mean, 30 minutes can feel like eternity. You do something you love and it's like, wow, 6 hours just went by. So you need to be in an environment that that supports you, and that's really critical. But community also might be faith-based systems that you're involved in. It could be athletics where coaches are involved, or clubs where there are adults that really provide some extra support. You know, it really does take a village, and we all have to sort of help. And I think we didn't grow up with just one person there for us, and we try to have that village so we buffer each other and we hold each other. Special talents is especially applicable to kids who find academics very challenging. This came up in the literature because, you know, in school, if it's hard for you, you're getting a lot of negative feedback, or you're feeling bad about things. And so the special talent is making sure that your child or your students have something that they feel very proud of, and that they can really truly feel that they are good at. Maybe it's art, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's friendships. You know, or maybe it's something in academics, but it's important to really build that special talent and make sure that they're really aware of it. So we often call it like the island of special competence. You know, you go to that island and that's your little paradise. You're there and you shine. And then self-regulation, wow, that's a big one and critical, right? Can you calm down when you're upset? Can you stay focused when you need? Can you listen when you need? So it's behavioral self-regulation, it's attentional self-regulation, and then it's mood self-regulation. And that's where a lot of psychologists come into play to help support, but that's a biggie. So again, in this Kauai, this study, the resilience literature goes way back. I would say we're now into the 70th year, 60th or 70th year. It started, one big study started in the island of Kauai, and it was high poverty, high alcoholism, and low education. So they had a lot of those adversity, but they looked at still that the key was a feeling of confidence that you can overcome, you can do something, right? We feel very helpless if we feel like we can't do anything. But if we have the sense that we can take action and the action will actually impact our lives and improve our lives, then we feel bolstered. You know, if you're told you can't do something over and over, or you're getting the feedback from the outside world that that's not going well, right? We just sort of sink, as opposed to knowing that, hey, we can do this. We may not do it alone. We ask for help, which is another factor of resilience. It's really being able to ask for help. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And again, being proactive, the key concept is you can't control everything, but you can control many aspects. And here's a recent thing, but the literature talks about turning points. So perhaps kids did not do so well, but then there was a turning point. There was an event, or perhaps there was a person, or perhaps they joined the military, or for the structure, because they really needed that post high school. But I put this picture because I've been very impressed with these kids really turning their grief into positive action. Again, they didn't do it alone, although I think they did, but I know there's a lot of support that goes into it, including all of the parents. But it's a turning point. It's taking something that happens and really turning it into a positive action. And holding a lot, like I said, we do a little exercise where we just talk about, you know, with books and stress and just carrying it, and your body gets heavier and heavier. And am I on the thing? Okay, we're good? Okay. So, but we talk about what's the motivation. You know, it is hard to change. So you need to start with why bother? Kids need to understand, why are they learning all this stuff? Why do they need to do this? So that you can slowly go from extrinsic, you know, outside motivators to more internalizing. And if they buy into it and they understand a little bit about why they're changing or why something needs to change, then that keeps the motivation going. And so, you know, as psychologists and parents, we've used a lot of reward systems for kids, but I think always you need to say, if you've done something well, you know, okay, even if you use a reward, here's the reward. I'm really proud of you, but you must feel really proud of yourself. And keep going from that external to the you must be proud of yourself. And wow, it is hard to make changes, but wow, you are doing it. And the payoff is, how is it going to improve your life? It's going to make your mood better. If you're worried about friends or you're really shy, then it's hard to approach someone. But the payoff is you may make a new friend. But if you don't take that risk, then you're not going to do that. So it's also teaching them about appropriate risk taking. So, and here, so this is something we use to talk about. I brought a little mini dart board, but we use it to talk about sort of thinking on the mark, which is the bullseye, and realistic. So for example, you didn't do well on a test, and on the mark is, well, it's one test, and I can study harder next time. I can ask for some help from a teacher if something I didn't understand, and you know, I'll try it again. But a little bit off the mark might be, oh, you know, I'm really bad at that and I can't do it and I'm going to probably fail. And then way off the mark, and kids really say this sometimes to me, is, right, I'm stupid, I can never do that, and I might get kicked out of school. You know, and it's that belief of, you know, and part of it's like the optimism, right? Here, the off the mark is that it's all bad and it's forever. Whereas on the mark is it is the specific test that I blew, and I have another chance. And so I like visuals. I'm very visual. So I like to have props to teach kids these concepts. I did teach in New York and taught some special ed, and we used multi-sensory because we all learn through multi-sensory means. And I think it becomes more meaningful if you can touch it and you can see it and you can hear it all at the same time. All right. So I said this, at least one warm, loving parent, firm limits and boundaries. It's very important to have those limits. You don't want to have such strict rules that they're not realistic, but kids feel more secure when there's structure and when there are rules and when there's consistency. And they learn the difference between, one parent or another parent or an au pair, who's gonna give in and who's gonna do it, and you don't want to get that splitting. So you want to have simple rules. I say, a few rules and then just make sure they're enforced. And then you're going to probably get, it's not fair, right? How many kids say, it's not fair, you do, right? Not everything is fair, but you know what? It's fair from my perspective, and we have to figure out how to make this work, and sometimes it's because I said no, or it's because I said yes, and have those limits. So we know that firm limits and boundaries are really critical for parent managing and for helping resilience. And monitoring your child. This is really even more important as they get into teen years. There's a lot of research that supports the idea that if parents know what's going on, it's not that the kids are going to tell you. I remember when my kids, I often would do lots of carpooling, and they would talk in the back and they forget you're there. You get a lot of good information that way, right? But the other way to monitor is a network, a PTA, support groups for parents, talking with people in your community, because the kids talk to their parents often about other children, and then you can share that. You can get information about your own child, but you can also find out what's going on about, in the community at large. So that support network is really important for parents, and it's important for monitoring. And what they showed is those who have family dinners, I don't know that anybody has family dinner every night of the week, but if you have a few, that those few actually seem to correlate with less drug use in older kids and less sort of truancy, which I thought was interesting. And it's but I think what it is it gives you the opportunity to sit down and talk with each other. Go on to this one, connections and the friends. And we're going to do a demonstration in a little bit of one idea of what you can do to develop some more of the social, at least one close friend, and the ability to express empathy. And what I do sometimes in our groups is we literally either take our shoes off and we step near other people's shoes to try to understand their perspective. Or sometimes I'll Google shoe, and you know how you can get the image, and I cut the image out, and we put shoes, different kinds of shoes around the room. And just, to see from somebody else's viewpoint. Or say, hey, if you look at a building and you look at the front of the building, it looks one way. If you look on the side of the building, it looks a little differently, but it's the same building. And to illustrate some of that. So we're going to do some, a little bit of talking about CBT.
So we're going to share a little bit about what are some things we can do at home and what we do in our Resilience Builder program to actually increase that resilience. So CBT refers to cognitive behavioral therapy, and cognitions are just a fancy word for thoughts. So the idea is that the way we think influences how we feel emotionally and physiologically and how we behave or act. I often use the example of a sports game with kids, like we're at the same Nats game. If I'm rooting for the Nats, you're rooting for the Mets win. I might have the thought, this game is awful. I might feel disappointed. I might be kind of physiologically slouching. My behavior might be to mope around. But your team just won. You might think, great game. We're going to win the playoffs. Feel really excited. High five your friend. And so sometimes starting kind of with an innocuous situation that anyone kind of relate to can be helpful to think about in any given situation. The way that people think about it changes how they feel and act. So even if you find out you're going on like a school field trip overnight, some kids might think this is going to be so fun, feel really excited, start thinking what they're going to pack and do, while other kids might have the thought, oh no, I'm going to get sick, I'm going to miss my parents, what if there's a creepy monster at the place, feel really nervous, start to have kind of stomach aches, difficulty breathing, heart racing fast, and then try to avoid it in some way. I'm too sick, I can't go. So trying to make that connection. So we work on these skills at the Resilience Builder program, which is a group therapy developed by Dr. Alvord in 1992, and it's manualized in that book that she referenced. So we host groups both within our practice and then as well as in DC and MCPS schools, as well as Georgetown University is doing them, and actually all around the world they're happening right now. So this is kind of a group-based curriculum where we put kids who are same age and gender in a group of about 4 to 6 kids together, using those cognitive behavioral therapy strategies to teach children how those resilience building skills that Dr. Alvord has mentioned in terms of how to be proactive, how to build that social competence, how to get along with other people, how to be a good sport if you're losing and how to not quit, if you're winning, how to not brag, how to be flexible about what game to play and how to play it, what rules to abide by. So it's really a lot of using those didactic skills, but also practicing them in the moment. Really like group interaction, if some kid's poking your chair or doesn't want to do what you want to do, how to handle it calmly. And we adapt this from all the way down from kindergarten through high school. And one unique thing about these groups is that they are transdiagnostic. So we have some kids have no diagnosis at all, some have ADHD, some have anxiety, some are on the autism spectrum. And it kind of, with the autism spectrum kids are in their own subgroups, but for the rest of it, we kind of mush them all together because in the real world, you have to deal with people who have all sorts of different strengths and weaknesses and kind of how to adapt with each other. So we've done this both in a private practice and within school settings. And so one of the kind of key parts is helping children to identify what it is that's triggering these situations and what are the thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations that follow. Often, even as parents, it's kind of hard to know what's going on. We just kind of see, my kid's telling me they hate me or they're punching their younger sibling, and trying to help them scale back and figure out what happened. What happened that made you do that action? And sometimes we don't even kind of aren't aware of what it is. So it could be as little or big as kind of your siblings chewing with their mouth open. And you have that thought of they're going to embarrass me or people at the restaurant are going to judge them. You might feel really nervous, your body tenses up, and you might see something not so kind to your sibling. And so part of this is helping to recognize how accurate, how on the mark versus off the mark are those thoughts. So for example, I had a kid this week who became aggressive with the younger sibling who wasn't sharing the iPad. And I kind of assumed it would be one of those, it's not fair, it's my turn. In that moment, his off-the-mark thought was, she doesn't like me because she wasn't sharing. So helping him recognize in that moment, is this accurate or not? Maybe just a 2-year-old didn't feel like passing over an iPad, probably reasons other than not liking the older brother. And so helping them recognize what's going on and labeling that feeling. There's really cool research that just identifying and putting words to that feeling help to self-regulate. So often this is kind of how to think in a more optimistic way. So as you can see, there's some images on the board of like a half of a donut or half of a pie, and trying to, often we kind of hear kind of negative focus of things. I only got this. I only got my parents' used iPhone. I didn't get the new one. That's not fair. I only got the half a cookie. It's not fair. I should get the whole one. So trying to kind of point out in that moment, like, yeah, it's still cool that you got a smartphone or you got a cookie to begin with. So recognizing kind of how can we think about things in a more positive light. And as Dr. Alvord mentioned, a lot of resilience has to do with kind of how do we handle sort of this feedback. A lot of children with learning disabilities or ADHD kind of receive a lot of negative feedback. They might feel like they're not doing well at school, they're not as athletic, or kind of focusing on those things. And so one of the things we tend to do is to focus on how to kind of build up these strengths and build up that self-confidence. So within our group, we have what we call a compliment basket, and we practice this within the group of giving each other compliments, focusing, I know someone mentioned kind of the growth mindset, not just on like an outcome, like you're pretty, but like you worked hard at that. So kind of focusing on kind of growth-oriented things. And we also often suggest having a compliment basket at home so that we can kind of create more of that positive feedback loop at home to build those family connections. So Dr. Cummings is going to help share an example.
Sure, so I'm going to make good eye contact with Dr. Schifrin, and I'm going to say, Dr. Schifrin, I like how you're always friendly, and you say hi to me every day.
Awesome. So that's a great example. We would often just kind of write them down on like an index card or Post-it note and throw them in. At the family, we often have like kind of, each family member does them as they happen or throughout the week. You could read them through if you have the family dinners or in the evenings, just to make sure that you are kind of adding to that family feedback. And even adults, it feels nice to kind of get compliments from children. Relationships from parents to kids are often pretty one-sided. And so sometimes it's nice of like, hey, I like that you packed my lunch. To hear that can feel pretty good. And so having kids practice complimenting as well. We are going to practice using our conversation ball, which has a lot of open-ended questions. We're going to select a topic, and each person is going to ask a question, make good eye contact, and answer their question, and then ask a follow-up using whatever question word they land on.
So I'm going to throw it first.
Okay, it landed on who. So who is your favorite author?
Who is my favorite author? That's a really good question. I like an author. She's an Australian author. Her name's Leanne Moriarty. All right, we're going to talk about books some more. So I got Where in your house do you like to read?
It's also a great way to teach kids about staying on topic, because a lot of the kids I work with suddenly go off on tangents. And so sometimes I will actually write the topic down so that we remember what the topic is, because we talk about conversation builders and conversation busters. So a conversation builder is being able to ask somebody a question. We usually say a few sentences and then look, are they paying attention to you? Ask them a question then, and think about one of these what, when, who, why questions, because they're not yes or no answers. But a conversation buster would be interrupting. It would be going off on some other topic, or it would be doing something annoying, perhaps, that would stop the conversation. And so these are great things that can be done in a classroom. It can be done at home. And just that basket is really, you can have a shoebox. It can be anything. The nice thing is that putting the date on it also, so that you can go back to it another day. So maybe the day didn't go as well, but you still have some things that you can go back to. And I knew it was a hit when I did this with a family. It was like a 9-year-old, but there was a teenage brother, and he was like, that's so stupid, I'm not gonna do that, it's so juvenile. And then the parents said, no, we are going to do it. And one day they forgot about it, and he's like, yeah, where's that basket? So I knew, okay, it really meaningful, but it's got to be specific praise. So some family protective factors are showing appreciation. I think we know a lot from the positive psychology movement that kind of gratitude and just showing appreciation goes a long way to building relationships. We talk about a lot of children who feel very entitled. So it's a good counter to, wow, these things don't just happen. These things happen because our family is giving it to you, our school is giving it to you, and really having that appreciation. Time together, we used to think, oh, it's quality of time, but it's actually also quantity of time. It does make a difference in terms of what helps build resilience. It's that time. It doesn't always mean you're interacting, but just sort of proximity helps. Or being in cars is wonderful because you're all sort of locked in there together. But it's a way to bond over an activity or a song. You know, my kids are much older now, but we used to sing those Raffi songs, you know, banana, whatever, I can't remember, but we would sing it all the time. And so that was, you know, that's something we even remember now. Banunas? What is it? Something like that. You probably all don't know what I'm talking about, but. So, and then just a kind of a commitment and some ethical standards and teaching kids about integrity and your family values. Whatever your family values are, sort of, you know, we are role models, whether we are the parents or we are the teachers or we are the psychologists. So it's not just what I say, it's do as I do. And that means that we have to explain when we calm down and we're upset, we can model the problem solving. You know, I do a lot of talking out loud of, you know, oh, I made a mistake. But you know, that's okay because next time I'll try a different strategy or next time I'll ask somebody for help. Or, oh, I took some deep breaths and that helped calm me down. Just teaching kids what we do helps them learn to do it. The other thing is telling kids what to do rather than what not to do, right? Because we tend to notice, you know, when someone is doing something wrong. We have to really make that effort to point out when they're doing well. And I say to parents all the time, if kids are playing nicely with each other, make sure that you comment and that you praise them for it and that you notice it, not just when they're getting into a tiff with each other. And the ability to deal with conflict. Everybody has conflict. It's not the number of arguments you have, it's, you know, can you resolve them? Is there a mechanism in the family to not ignore it, because I think we also don't want to just sweep things under the rug, but can we teach them that, yes, there is a conflict even between parents, but you know, we've come up with a plan of how we're going to deal with it the next time. Or we're going to forgive each other because we make mistakes, or whatever it might be. So some of the risk factors with kids, especially with LD, are sort of the difficulties of learning and feeling like I can't do it, I can't do it well. And I did some groups for the GTLD program in Montgomery County when they had that. And I felt and this is supported by the research, that it is, you know, not the LD that's the problem, it's sort of all the emotional impact around it. And teaching kids that they are not lazy. I just don't believe in, you know, sort of lazy. It's because it's hard. I mean, who doesn't want to do something that's really hard, right? So then we start avoiding and understanding that it's a pattern of maybe difficulty, frustration, and avoidance, as opposed to they're lazy and they just don't want to do it. I think is really critical for the way we frame it so that we can help kids. But those are some of the risk factors. The key protective factors are viewing it as a specific difficulty, whatever that might be, and not global. So I have a hard time with X, not I have a hard time with everything. But you know, the specificity, and then learning it and accepting it. Sort of accepting that certain things are difficult. I have an auditory processing difficulty. I thought it was because I grew up speaking several languages, but then as I got more into doing and getting some testing in grad school, I learned that I actually have a hard time separating syllables sometimes. So for years in elementary school, I thought the Pledge of Allegiance was to Richard Stans. And I didn't know who Richard Stans was, right? So, and I realized that I do that quite a bit, and I had to be aware of it and accept it, and then know that I had to listen, and sometimes I had to ask for clarification. The same thing was true we had in graduate school. You had to do these visual perception tests. And when you look at two balls in this machine, your brain is supposed to put them together, and you're only supposed to see one ball. But no, my brain doesn't do that. My brain, the balls are like really desperately trying to get together, and they don't, which explains why when I would try to play ball, like on a sports team, I would get hit in the head with a ball, or I'd be like I'd be reaching, but it was somewhere else, because my eyes and it was really my brain could not coordinate that. And so I think understanding really helps us to accept it. I'm still a successful person, even though I can't play tennis because I can't tell where those balls are. But so we learn what our deficits are and what our weaknesses are, and we just build up our strengths. And learning 3 languages at the same time, I was probably a very confused child, and I spoke a little bit later, but hey, now I can sort of be in different places and listen to different languages and pick up words and and feel just more confident. And that is the key to the resilience. Framing it, and then understanding it and accepting it. And then utilizing supports and advocating for yourself. Self-advocacy is the key. Teaching the kids that, if you don't understand something, then ask for help. And that asking for help is actually a sign of strength and not of weakness. We can't all do everything, and if we ask somebody for help, then we grow from that. When I see this, especially when kids go off to college, and if they don't self-advocate and they don't talk about the accommodations they may need and keep talking about it and go to that support office, then it's not always failure, but it just makes it a lot tougher. So if you start that self-advocacy early, that is a protective factor, and knowing that I can do this. And then setting realistic goals. Others are believing you can succeed, parents fostering authentic self-esteem, not, oh, you're so wonderful, but you tried really hard and you persevered, and then you asked a friend, you called somebody to get clarification. That kind of thing is how you build authentic self-esteem. And then the turning points. So with ADHD, it's somebody who really can root for you too, coaches. And I see this with a lot of kids who don't have maybe the family support, having someone who really believes in them and can root for them. So you're all here tonight. You are the cheerleaders, I am sure. And but maybe you're cheerleading for other people's children as well. I have a good friend who grew up in a family with an alcoholic, abusive parent, and he found his best friend's parents were actually both teachers, very loving, caring. He lived there practically. He was there a lot, getting that support. And so sometimes we play a role in helping other children in the community. All right, so what we want to do is really develop awareness of thoughts. But what do you see here? What comes to mind when you see this picture? Danger, yes. Anything else? Aggressive, right? Aggression. So we usually think of emotions when we see something, but what we try to do is develop the thought. So the thought behind the danger or the aggression is, oh, they might hurt me, so I need to step away. And so it's part of our training of really understanding thoughts, because the thoughts in that CBT model, those affect how we feel emotionally, it affects how we feel physically, and then it determines how we react behaviorally. So if our thought is, oh, that is going to hurt me, right? We're going to get tight muscles, tighten our stomachs, our breath may start faster, and then we're going to pull away and we're going to avoid. And so it may not be some creature like this, it might be a class that they're afraid of, and you see this reaction and the avoidance. But if the, oh, I thought I had another picture, but if the thought is, hey, this is going to be fun, right? We're more relaxed, we tend to go toward the activity, and we just feel better. So the thought really drives a lot of what our actions and our physiology. But that's not what, if you say to somebody, or kids mostly, you know, how are you doing? They tell you an emotion word. And it's important to go back to that, well, what's the thought? And that's self-talk. So we all talk to ourselves in our heads. Good thing, yes. Right, right. And that's the self-talk that we do all the time in our heads, right? And when we become aware of our self-talk, then we can also work on changing it. I also say to kids, you can do an indoor scream, you know, like they're really angry, but you can do that same indoor scream in your head. You can think some awful thoughts about somebody or awful, like, I don't really want to punch him. But that doesn't then have to translate into action. And so the self-talk, and thank you for sharing that, you know, the comment was that the first thought is, I don't want to answer it because I might be wrong. And how common is that? Like for all of us, right? We don't want to, we worry about other people judging us all the time. And yet we all make mistakes, and most times people don't judge us the way we blow it up in our heads. So I wrote an article for NPR on, so you might just want to look it up, on teens and reframing their thoughts. If you just go to NPR Mary Alvord, it'll come up. But it talks a lot from a cognitive behavioral approach and about how critical it is to reframe thinking. And, you know, I use the first example. It doesn't show up at, like, you know, a friend, you text a friend and the friend doesn't text you back right away. It's like, oh, she doesn't like me anymore, you know, or I've been left out of everything, right? We catastrophize these things. We blow these things up. So the main thing in terms of helping to be resilient is the thought process. And I'm just going to quickly, we did that, showed you a little bit of what we use with the dartboard. That other fun thing is then they can play darts after, magnetic only. And these are some of the thinking areas. And I use an example of this turtle that's up, so you don't have a picture of that, but the turtle, and right, the helpless is, I'm on my back and I can't do anything. But the resilient, the proactive is, how am I going to get back up if I'm a turtle? Any ideas? What could a turtle do? You rock back and forth, right? And hopefully, or maybe make some noise, and maybe some other little turtle will come and push you over. But you really don't want to avoid and just go into your shell. I think this isn't working anymore. So that's the other little turtle. You also don't want to get stuck in thoughts. And we use kind of like sticky gum, because if we get stuck in certain thoughts, that's what we remember. If we remember, you know, the day was pretty good, but somebody said something to us that hurt our feelings, and if we get stuck on that, where the 90% of the rest of the day was fine, what are we going to remember the next day? We're going to remember that that day wasn't so good. And just think about it. Sometimes we don't remember why we even thought something was bad, but we carry that emotion. And so toward not getting stuck and helping kids reframe that is really important. So these are the thinking errors, and I won't go over them. One thing we do is we make a little remote control, especially with younger kids, and and just say, you can change your channel. Like, you can be on the angry, frustrated channel, or you can be on the proud channel. What would be on the proud channel? What would be on the happy channel? What would be on the thinking channel? What would be on the problem-solving channel? And just giving the message that they can change channels. I don't do this with teens because they would be insulted, but we talk about the concepts with them of changing. And it gets back to like being able to be open to change is so important. And I'm quickly, before we do our chocolate exercise, show you, here's my cup. Again, we talked about sort of not holding on to the negative thoughts. We do a demo, so we have to pretend here and use your imagination that the bottom has rocks, which might be the negative events of the day, and the rest is water. So we don't want to deny the negative events or the hurtful events or the frustrating, because we don't want to then avoid those feelings or those thoughts. We want to confront them. But we also want to make sure we're aware of the water. And we don't, if we pour it through and we just let all the good stuff out, then we're just left with those virtual rocks. So we just use, again, just different little, props to demonstrate some of these concepts. But it's really critical, and we do that where we often zoom in on the negative, and then we feel bad, or we made a mistake, or we were embarrassed, and it's hard to move off of that. So we are going to do an exercise. If you haven't gotten chocolate, we can pass them around, but do not open them. All right, everybody have their... So what we're going to do is a mindfulness exercise. I like to do, you've heard a lot about mindfulness, which is really focusing in on the moment and helping you get unstuck. If you're focused on the moment, you're not stuck on the past. You're also not worrying about the future. Mindfulness is often done, through various meditations, but especially the kids that I work with, and I myself really like active mindfulness, like doing something with it. So most people and most kids like chocolate. So there is the component of mindfulness not being judgmental, but we're doing something a little bit different with this. So what we want to do with mindfulness is we incorporate all of our senses. So take this Hershey, and I want you to put it to your ear and just move it around so you can hear that aluminum. And just be aware of the sound. And now bring it to your nose and smell it. And now you can stop smelling. And you can slowly open it. And when you open it, I want you to notice the colors. Some of you have two-toned. Didn't get any? There you go. So some of you have two-toned aluminum. I want you to notice the texture and the colors. And I want you to notice that paper. And look at the colors in that piece of paper. Really notice. You're bringing in all of your senses. And now smell it again. And notice the difference. Can't smell. Just smell it. And now I want you to put it in your mouth, but do not bite it. So you're just going to let it melt in your mouth.
You're going to be very disappointed when you turn around.
Oh.
You pushed your clicker.
I did, okay. That's okay. And with the chocolate, you're going to notice the shape and how it changes, the texture. You're really focusing on this Hershey kiss. And determine like what happens to it as it melts. Your thoughts may wander. Bring it back to the Hershey. And be aware of all the senses that you used to think about what you're doing in the moment. Your mind calms. You're not thinking about the past. You're not thinking about the future. You're thinking about here and now. So any observations? Probably so. Tasted good. What did you notice about the taste? Did it change? It was sweet. Mm-hmm. Smooth texture, yeah. Familiar. How about, yes?
Could you, I think you still have a wrapper in your hand. Can you drop it? I'm hearing this.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's my hyperactivity.
It's a little bitter,
It's a little bitter.
dark chocolate.
Oh, yes, you got the dark chocolate, so it's a little bit different. So, you know, the smell is different with the wrapper. It's usually more potent without once you open it. And you just become to notice. Did you notice your mind wandering? Yeah. You know, and that's normal. And we say then you just bring your mind back. The other thing I use this, and the kids actually came up with this because I give it to them about 5 minutes before we do the exercise, and one kid said, "Dr. Alvord, you're killing me." You know? It's like, you're killing me. I just want to open it and pop it in my mouth. And so I said, "But you didn't. So what does that mean? What did you show me?" Self-control, right? So he's like, "Oh." You know, for some kids, they're not aware that all these little things are examples of them showing self-control. So we start little, and then we build. Okay, so now that we're nice and calm, we're going to open it to questions, and all three of us are here. Out of an adolescence where you experienced a lot of unhappiness, you developed that technique of sort of thinking forward and what am I looking forward to? What is there that's going to be there for me? And now you've taught it to your kids, which is wonderful because we are the role models, and you know, especially if we do this habitually, then that becomes incorporated. Exactly. So the comment is that, you know, often, and her son was overreacting to a lot of little things, which we see a lot, and just showing them that it's on a continuum. Actually, we use that a lot, so thank you for saying that, because we even talk about, is it a little thing, is it a medium thing, or is it a big thing? I just did a lesson in the group on anxiety management, and I had a thermometer, and I said, you know, not all worries are the same level. Some of them with the thermometer may be at 10 degrees, others might be, you know, 80 degrees, something else might be 30 degrees. And it's important for us in terms of regulating to understand that things are not at the same level. You know, what I recommend is starting young, but if you didn't start young, to just start with tasks that are easy enough to do that become their responsibility and help them become more independent, right? It's a slow process, but it's like itty bitty steps. And so the expectations have to be lower, and then it may mean a multi-sensory way for them to start monitoring themselves and getting that feedback themselves. So whereas we might say, okay, I did this task, that may be enough, they may need a chart or something on their iPad or something interesting where they note what they did and how that made them feel. Because you've got to associate the two of taking that initiative and then feeling really like you have accomplished something, even if it's a little thing. But, moving on. Do you want to add anything to that?
Adding on to that was the idea of shaping, or sometimes called scaffolding, that we want to kind of build up, kind of taking that small task, and we do want to kind of make it smaller, and then praising that. So even if the task is, I'm going to ask mom for help putting the socks in the drawer, but just finding the small stuff they can do and adding on to it.
Over and over. I mean, that's the challenge with kids with executive function, is they also don't, the working memory isn't there as much. So, and that's why I say you need multisensory. So they may need the visual, they may need auditory, they may need kinesthetic to get that. And when I was teaching special ed, I used to make a lot of things out of sandpaper because some of that tactile helped them remember whatever it was. And so they made these associations. Sure, I guess there's two. So the question is about special talents is then if you have a lot of different challenges, shall we say, and then there's a special interest, should we encourage that? And I would say, yes, that is a special talent because there's all this knowledge, but at the same time, you don't want it, you want it to have some commonality with others, so that's not the only topic they're really focused on. So it would be, yes, it's really great, but what are other things in common with other people? Because I see kids, especially on the spectrum, where they get their specialized interest and then they have a hard time moving off of it. But I would just look for, small things like, does he do kind acts for people? And really build up that, like, I am a kind person. I do kind things for. So that's a special talent too, to really be thoughtful about other people or the special interests. I would just say it's whatever, but you also want to make sure that they have then enough in common with others to have conversation. I think you need to be specific. See, I think the specificity really matters. So when you're talking, but I would say that even if something comes easily, that's a strength. Like if I'm, if geometry really, I get it right away, that's a strength of mine that I have that talent that I can do it. It's not a cop-out just because it's easy. So I'm going to turn it to a twin. Yeah. Dr. Cummings is a twin.
Oh, sure.
So I know what it's like, right? Because my sister and I, we looked a lot alike, and people were always trying to figure out, well, like, what's different about you guys? So I can relate to my clients on that. But I like to talk to my clients about, like, weaknesses. I think of them not necessarily weaknesses, but, like, things that we're working on. And then maybe we'll talk about some strategies. And then we say, there are some things that are our weaknesses, like, that aren't so important, right? Like, I often say, like, I'm not so good at cooking. For me in my household, it's not really something I need to work on, but maybe there are other things, and kind of what's the plan for that? We all have things maybe that are tough for us, right? And then we all learn how to work around those things, right? I understand that, especially with twins. I get it. All right.
To add on to that, not a twin is kind of helping notice those attributions. So when things go well, often people kind of dismiss them as like, that was easy, or that test didn't count, or everyone did well. And they go poorly, it's I'm dumb or I'm stupid, kind of this global permanent thing. And so one of the things we try to work on is kind of trying to flip that. When things go well, I studied hard, or I might be good at math, versus kind of making more of those internal attributions when things go well, rather than only when things go poorly.
And then some things are really hard to change, and they'll always be difficult for us, right? And then we just have to then accept it. you know, and develop compensation. I worked with an adult, a very, very severely ADHD man who actually owned and ran a company, but he had this amazing you know what you'd call executive secretary? She was his executive function. And then on his belt he had like a little memo thing, and his, this is a long time ago, but he had one of those data watches that he could put appointments in it, and it would, you know, but now we have all this technology. So even if you always will have that weakness, if you can acknowledge it and you can advocate for accommodations and technology to help you, then you come ahead too. And it's how we frame things. And also what works for one kid isn't exactly going to work for another. And, you know, we keep trying. And parenting is hard. You know, I have 3 kids and they're different. You know, they're not kids anymore, but, you know, they're very different. And one strategy that worked would backfire. And I was like, don't try that on me because you just did that with Scott. No. So you're in early childhood and a dad, and when somebody gets frustrated, child gets frustrated, you sort of get down to that level and just say, understand, it's really hard, and we may not get very far with it, but we're going to keep trying, hopefully. The question, the comment is, are strong emotions acceptable? And I think, yes, developmentally, you know, if a 2 or 3-year-old falls on the floor crying and kicking, you know, we can help them resolve whatever and say, all right, you know, let's get up and now, you know, what the problem is, what can we do about it? If an 8-year-old falls on the floor and has that emotion, it's not socially acceptable. It's just not going to work in school. So we need to teach them ways to problem solve from age 3. You know, how do you wait for something? How are you patient for something? The good old marshmallow test that you heard of, which is now also the Hershey Kiss test. Can you wait? Delay of gratification is really important to teach. But we do have different expectations for different ages as well. Also developmental levels. I mean, not all 3-year-olds are at the same place. So taking into account, which is why teaching and parenting is so hard, because it's not like this works for all. So does that answer it?
Yeah,
Yeah. And then in some culture, I think I had it on the cultural slide, that in some cultures strong emotions aren't acceptable. And even in our culture, sometimes males are not allowed to show certain emotions, which are okay for females to show. So we got all these different standards, but I think the key is being aware of it and then meeting somebody where they are. So strategies for really shy kids, to self-advocate, what we do is a lot like that, the question balls and a lot of scripting of what can you say, how can you say it. We also talk about how do you hold your body. So I talk about shoulders up, back, and down, because if you stand with that kind of a posture, you are projecting more confidence even if you are super anxious. But how you stand, and then the eye contact, like when Dr. Cummings said, eye contact of throwing the ball is also really critical. So you teach them those elements. But we find that the questions are really great because they have something they can do with a STEM, and then they may need practice and role play for the shy kids who don't know.
Just don't even want to come out
Yeah.
of their room.
Right. So you just keep encouraging, and you do smaller, small steps and increase more and more. And then sometimes it's facing your fear, because if the fear is sort of being out there and judged, or, someone's going to think I'm not good enough, is facing that. And what we do is exposure therapy. So exposure therapy is actually, we have kids going around with little clipboards and asking questions of the therapist. Oh, and who are you? And did you have a nice day? And what's your favorite color? And so they'll do a survey of their favorite color. So exposure therapy is a very important component of cognitive behavior therapy, and used a lot for shy kids.
Thank you.
And out of the office, that could be like practicing ordering at a restaurant or asking a question, where's the bathroom? Because there's often, a lot of fear of like, I'm going to, be a burden or that's rude to ask. So having them do that when they might normally avoid it. And even if they don't really care, like what time is it, just approaching strangers and rewarding them for doing that. Especially if they're having a hard time with self-advocacy, I sometimes make them practice like ordering something complicated, like I want that without the cheese or without the dressing, just because it's kind of that same sort of, I'm asking for something that's a burden. If you can ask for that at a restaurant, it's easier to ask for that at school.
Right, and sometimes I encourage use of social media or texting, because that is one step toward getting out of their shell, and texting or, leaving a voicemail or something like that. I think you were next, and that's what exposure is, practice, but you start with small steps, and then you build on them.
And the modeling of that.
And the modeling is really important, and it's hard. It's hard if you are intrinsically internalizing to get out there, but we talk about being brave. So it's brave actions. What small brave action can you start with? You had a question. So sort of the gold standard for anxiety treatment is cognitive behavior therapy. But that's not to say that we don't recommend, you would disagree, but so
According
well, the gold standard is to start with CBT, but you may then need the medication if the anxiety is so high that you can't then go the next step.
Is EMDR an effective treatment for anxiety? And I think that the research suggests that it can be effective, but they find that it's actually the exposure component that's effective. There's not really any data suggesting that the eye movement part is necessary.
The literature is mixed, and it's also sometimes a provider, because people are not pure in doing one thing or another. But I think we have to stop. Thank you so much. I'll be here a few extra minutes if you ask questions. Thank you.